Rick Doblin with us now. And so, Rick, welcome. We're delighted to have you in person. We're glad to know you're home. We recognize where you are. And thank you so much. We look forward to hearing what's going on with MAPS these days.
Yes, well, there's been a really tremendous new development that I look forward to sharing. And that has to do with the interim analysis of our second phase 3 study, which we just learned about last week. So before I say what the results were, let me explain a little bit what the interim analysis is. And the basic understanding that you need to put it into context is to realize that this drug development process that we're, sorry, this drug development process that we're engaged in, it's slanted, or not slanted, but it's designed to help the pharmaceutical companies succeed in getting their drugs approved. And the interim analysis is part of this effort to make it work out for the pharma companies. And so what that means is, in order to get a drug approved as prescription medicine by the FDA, usually you need two phase 3 studies. Each of them have to be statistically significant, and you have to have a good safety record. Statistical significance is determined as 0.05. What it means is that there's a 1 in 20 chance that your results are due to some random factor rather than due to your intervention. And you can have, the way statistics works is the more people you have in your study, the more statistical power you have to find ever and ever smaller differences. Because with the more people in your study, you kind of wash out variability. And so you can see what is the difference from the thing that your intervention. And so statistical significance is good. It means that there's something there that you've found and you have reliably found it. But whether statistical significance has clinical significance is a different story. And that's looked at generally by a measure called effect sizes. And effect size is the magnitude of the effect. And it can be, it's a measure that you can compare effects from different interventions across studies. So when you design the phase 3 study, the way that you need to do it is you, first off, you pick the probability of success that you would like to have. Often it's 80% likelihood of success. Because we can't really afford failure, or it would be very difficult for us to raise all the money to failure. We set our probability at a 90% probability for success, and then you pick a certain effect size. You know, how strong is your effect going to be? The stronger the effect, the fewer people you need in your study. So we picked an effect size of a medium effect size. So we're sort of conservative in the effect size we chose, and we're also more conservative in that we're using 90% probability rather than 80% probability as our cutoff point. All right, and so once you've got those factors, the 90%, the effect size that we're predicting, then you can use your prior data and you do the statistical calculations and you come up with how many subjects you need in your study. So when we did that, we ended up needing 2 studies, phase 3, each with 100 subjects. So the way that the FDA sort of slants this for getting approval for pharmaceutical companies is that once you've set this up and you've started your study, you can pick an arbitrary point in the process where you have a sneak peek at the data. And it's not that we do, it's an independent data monitoring committee that looks at the unblinded data, and they look at it for what's called sample size re-estimation. And so what it means is if the actual data that you're getting is somehow or other not as good as you hope, if the effect is smaller, and then it becomes difficult to get statistical significance, you can add more people to the study so that you get statistical significance. And that's commonly accepted. That's the way FDA drug development research is done. A lot of academic research for big studies, they also do interim analysis. You could maybe even, if it's a big important thing with thousands of people, if the interim analysis shows that it's working, you can stop the study and everybody gets the treatment instead of the control, or if it's too dangerous, you shut the study down. But in any case, the idea is that in drug development research, you can modify the number of subjects in your study in order to get statistical significance. And the way the FDA thinks about it is that you have group averages that you're comparing. But in the two groups, your experimental group and the control group, there's a variability. Some people respond better, some people don't respond. And so what the FDA recognizes is that even if you have like a low effect size, maybe you'll be able to figure out one day who are the people that are responding, who are the people that are not responding. And you can kind of tailor it to the people that are responding the most. So this is kind of the justification that the FDA has for letting you have more subjects into the study in order to get statistical significance. This idea, maybe you'll figure out who it's right for. Now, effect size is an effect size of 1 is 1 standard deviation from the norm. That's pretty great, actually. The SSRIs that were approved have effect sizes of 0.35, 0.4, one was 0.56, but low to medium effect sizes. So that's why you could see we picked an effect size that was higher than anything from SSRIs and that we felt was conservative, and we picked this 90% probability of success. All right, so all that's a prelude to just say that the number that I got from the data monitoring committee was 0, that we did not add anybody. We don't have to add anybody to the study. And we could only do this interim analysis when we had 60% of the people, or 60, had reached their primary outcome measure, and we had all 100 of the initial ones enrolled. All right, so we did agree that we would, enroll a few more just in case of dropouts or things like that. So we are now stopping enrollment. We have done all the enrollment we need to do. We don't need to add anybody. And what that means is that we have at least a 90% chance of obtaining statistical significance from our second phase 3 study. And that we have at least a medium effect size. And in our first study, we had a large effect size, very large. We had a 0.91, which is called placebo subtracted, where we subtracted therapy from therapy plus MDMA. So that was the effect size just of MDMA. But the within groups, the people who got MDMA plus therapy was a 2.1, an astonishing large 2.1 effect size, 2.1 standard deviations from the norm for severe chronic PTSD patients who had PTSD an average of 14 years. 1/3 of them had PTSD over 20 years. All right, so what that means now is that this is our first and major reality check for our second phase 3 study. We now believe that we are very likely to get approval for this successful phase 3 study. The last data point is going to be in October. But while I said that we have a 90% chance or greater chance of statistical significance, the issue that's really now coming to the fore is safety. So what could go wrong? The only thing that I think at this stage that could go wrong would be this idea that somebody commits suicide who got MDMA. That would show a risk. That would show that we're all the measures that we have to try to reduce that from happening didn't quite work. However, even if that happens, that would not, I think, block our approval. Because in our first phase 3 study, we did have one woman try to kill herself twice, another woman, severe suicidal ideation, checked herself into a hospital, did not kill herself, and both of those women were in the placebo. So what we're showing is that the background factors of severe chronic PTSD are suicide, and we know that. That's why we enroll people that have previously attempted suicide. So I think that if one person commits suicide, it would be a tragedy. It's one too many. We'd have to look at how did that happen, because we do permit people to have extra sessions, integrative sessions if they need them. We have we can't give anybody more MDMA. We have 3 MDMA sessions, but we give them more supportive sessions. So I'm saying this because I just don't want people to assume that we're 100% guaranteed to have statistical significance and a good safety record, and we'll have a successful second phase 3 study. But the chances are looking really, really good. So on the basis of that, we are now more sincerely putting energy into planning for success, which means planning for commercialization and how we go about it. Now, in what has also happened is, I would say it's a failure of mine and others to inspire enough philanthropists that we have raised 140 million in our history of 36 in grants and donations, all from just with no strings attached. These are grants and donations. Basically 125 million was grants and 15 million was donations. 15 million is grants for our marijuana PTSD study from the state of Michigan and the state of Colorado. But because we needed such a large amount of capital so quickly, we needed $70 million for really laying out, building our commercialization team. And so the news that I have to report about that is that we've now raised 50 million of that 70 million. And we think that we were going to be raising the rest 20 million in the next month. I would be really surprised. We've got some, well, I'll say that one of our favorite donors, who's supporting all sorts of psychedelic research, is now exploring the idea of making a donation of $5 to $10 million or a investment in this Vine Ventures deal. We're still trying to sort it out, but the idea is that whatever profits go back for the investment money would be redirected into patient assistance programs. So it's not really that they're trying to make money for themselves, they're trying to get their money back, but whatever over and above that they get back would go to patient assistance programs. And that's really important for us because unlike most pharma companies, or unlike basically all pharma companies whose ads you see on the TV about, oh, if you can't afford the drug, let us know, we can give it to you for low cost or free with our patient assistance program. And I've said this before, if we give people the MDMA for free, it doesn't do them any good if they can't afford the therapy. And the therapy is going to be in the neighborhood of $10,000 per person. We're just guessing based on, hourly rates and things like that. This of course doesn't count group therapy, but this is individual therapy. So we're going to need a lot of money to do patient assistance programs to really help the people that can't afford it, that have PTSD, because we're going to have to, it costs us $50 or whatever, $75 for the MDMA. But then we have to add another $10,000 for them to afford the therapy. Now, maybe we can get some therapists to work for free, but that's not going to work for a whole lot of people. Therapists need to earn a living too. And so this particular idea that we can take in money from an investor, it looks like she's going to maybe want to donate. Well, we're talking about whether it gets donated to MAPS, in which case we don't even have to pay the capital back. And then we just redirect as a restricted way the money to patient assistance programs. And what I would like to do after we raise this $70 million is for the future money that we're going to need. And that's for increasing our ambitions. That's for globalization of MDMA, for humanitarian projects, for drug policy reform work, for other indications of MDMA, until we reach this sustainability point. So this magic gold ring that we're going towards, this sustainability point, is where sales from the MDMA by prescription and the profits from that cover our operational costs and then start to generate more for more research, for more public education, things like that. So once we reach the sustainability point, then we are self-generating. And this is due to this data exclusivity. So, where we don't have patents, but we have exclusive use of our data for a period of time. So at this point, I just want to introduce Cameron, who's on this Zoom. And Cameron, we've just added to our development team. And Cameron, if you can say hello just for a minute, because so Cameron's going to be a key part of our being able to go forward as much as possible without any more investors, with donors. And I've got more stuff to say about updates and stuff, but Cameron, could you maybe introduce yourself just a bit?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I listened in on the music presentation, really enjoyed that. I've just joined MAPS just a few months ago. I'm going to be representing the organization for philanthropy in the Northeast. And so obviously we've got a lot of wonderful things ahead of us and some exciting news that's going to be percolating up in the next year or so. So if we need friends everywhere to help. We've got to really train an army of therapists and to be able to really provide health equity for the communities that need this kind of work. So if I'm here and available, if you have friends and people you know that you think would resonate with MAPS, we're becoming much more organized in how our outreach, and Rick is, is an amazing individual with quite a vision, and now we've got a bunch of people to help him and support this effort. So, and I've been in fundraising in the Northeast for I guess going on 30 to 40 years, and this really speaks close to my heart. I'm a gay man, so in the 80s, late 80s, 90s, I was on the dance floor doing ecstasy, and I realized now that I was processing my own PTSD and grief from friends dying of AIDS. It was an unconscious therapeutic process on the dance floor, but it helped me come out of a very shy aspect as a man that was kind of threatened by culture and all that sort of thing. So I do know the power of the medicine. And so thank you so much for all you do for MAPS, and let me know if I can be of help to you all.
We're so delighted. As Cameron said, we are getting more organized. I'm kind of, well, you can tell from my my office that organization is not my strong suit, but we are getting more organized, and I can see some value of that. We are getting more SOPs too. So I finally had, so the first other bit of update is connected to Boston. So I think we've reported before that we've hired Mike Millett as the person to lead our commercialization efforts. He's now the Chief Operating Officer of the Benefit Corporation. He was the #2 person at Mdma for their commercializing of the vaccination for COVID. And he's been working out great, bringing order, but we had a nice little interchange the other day where he's saying, we need rules for this, we need rules for that. And I'm like, okay, but then we need rules for when we can break the rules. So we're going to have an SOP for when you can violate the SOPs. So we are getting more organized, but hopefully that's not going to drown out creativity and spontaneity, and hopefully that we don't get into too much risk aversion and over conservatism, which is something I do worry about with bigger organizations, more people from pharma. But we are basically going to do a transparency policy, which means we are going to go through the drug development and the new drug application process in the open, with posting all the documents as we go forward, as a way to educate the entire field. Now there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 for-profit psychedelic companies doing various different things. So Mike Millett is working out great. We've also added 2 new people. We're adding to the board of directors of the Benefit Corp. One of them has Boston roots. He actually went to college with David Bronner and was the first person to give LSD to David Bronner. And his name is Dan Grossman. So he said that Dan is now a senior partner at the Boston Consulting Group, specializing in pharma. And we have done, we've engaged the BCG in our path to commercialization. They've done great reports. We've used that to show to the various investors in this Vine Ventures deal. And so Dan Grossman will be joining the board of directors of MAPS. And then the other person is a fellow named Jeff George. And Jeff is phenomenal from the pharma industry. And for those of you who know your history, Albert Hoffman invented LSD when he was working for Sandoz pharmaceutical company. And then he was at Sandoz, Albert was, so that was 43. He invented it in 38. 43 is when he accidentally dosed himself and figured out that it was psychedelic at extraordinarily small amounts. And then 15 years later, in 58 is when Albert figured out that psilocybin was the active ingredient in mushrooms. In the 60s, Sandoz was sending out LSD and psilocybin to researchers all over the world, but later that all got too controversial, it all got shut down. And Sandoz has since sort of closed shop on their psychedelics. It's been bought by Novartis, one of the world's largest pharma companies. And Sandoz is now a generic pharma company. They've got about 20,000 employees, billions of dollars of sales. And Jeff George was the CEO of Sandoz. So he's got that connection. He's also worked on other Novartis companies that had multi-billion-dollar sales. He's also a deadhead. He loves Fish, the band Fish, and he is very values aligned in terms of this kind of transparency. Also, he will be, we're actually having a difficult situation, I would say, whereas we bring in more people from pharma, they're used to more pharma salaries as compared to the salaries in the nonprofit. But we feel that we need their expertise. And so we think Jeff George can help us get the performance that we're paying for out of these high-priced pharma execs. They're not getting the same stock options or anything because we don't have that. So I don't want to say that these people are not making some sacrifices maybe to be working with us, but probably not much as far as I can tell. But so we're professionalizing our board. What that also means is that we really need to move forward in our metric for how we evaluate public benefit. And we want to actually quantify in a variety of different ways what public benefit means. It's kind of vague. So you have a public benefit corporation. Oh, it's a modification of capitalism. You prioritize public benefit over profit. But what does that actually mean in practice? Well, we're trying to quantify that. We're going to try to get it to a specific number where, that can vary over time. And that's going to be one of the big projects that we have going forward, is this idea of quantifying what is our public benefit. Part of it is the patient assistance programs. Part of it is supporting drug policy for reform. Part of it is doing things in a transparent way. Part of it is not patenting, not trying to block anybody from doing anything like some other companies have done. Part of it is, where do we set the price for MDMA? Because it's the price, but it will be the price paid for by insurance companies. People won't pay that. But where do we set the price? And then, as I indicated about the patient assistance programs, there's some cross-cutting incentives, you could say, is that we've got 1/3 to 1/4 people in America don't have insurance or have inadequate insurance. So, should we charge a higher price to insurance companies, maybe even help patients on the copay in order to make more money, so then we turn it around into a patient assistance program? Or, to continue to do other research, other pipelines without having to go more to philanthropy. So I think if we can get to this sustainability point through philanthropy after we've got this 70 million from the Vine deal, then hopefully the philanthropy can be for things that are clearly not, don't have a monetary return. So for example, we have a large number of humanitarian projects that we're trying to bring to fruition. Elizabeth Ames, who's been a big part of the Boston Psychedelic Research Group, has been trying to help us bring MDMA therapy to Ukraine. The Ukrainian government is very interested in doing that. They're working on passing laws to help the importation of controlled substances for unmet medical needs in Ukraine. We're getting closer to a situation where we can export MDMA to Armenia. Just as an interesting point about Armenia, they have a pact now with Russia that if a drug is approved in Russia, it's approved in Armenia. If it's approved in Armenia, it's approved in Russia. Russia is extremely repressive about stuff. So basically what it means is Russia is going to control what drugs get approved in Armenia, but they don't control the research. So we may be able to do research in Armenia and then over time build support for MDMA for PTSD and then have it approved in Russia as well. That's kind of a long shot. But Somaliland, we're at the final stages of trying to get an import permit. Rwanda, we'd like to do stuff. And this help connect us up with Partners in Health, where they have programs in Rwanda. So anyway, the humanitarian projects are all non-monetizable. They'll cost more than it brings in, but they're a crucial part of what we're doing. So we're trying to move forward with those. And I think the importance of now public education, the two main things that, now that we've got this interim analysis, and I think we're likely going to succeed, things could happen, but I think we're likely to succeed. The other things that we're considering now are really how do we accelerate the training of the therapist, and how do we accelerate public education. So we just had a meeting with a major philanthropist who worked in an industry where, or created an industry, actually, I should say, where they had to redefine strangers. So the industry I'm talking about is Airbnb. They had to define strangers as, they have a billboard right now, strangers are not that strange. Are you willing to let strangers into your house? How do you do that? So some of the founders there are interested in having us work together on a big PR campaign to try to change the public attitudes about psychedelics, which have been changing a lot, actually, quite a bit. And July 13th coming up is going to be the Netflix airing of the Netflix documentary of How to Change Your Mind. And it's going to have 4 episodes, each on a different drug. One of them is going to be MDMA. And another person that's been involved here from Boston, from the Winthrop Police Department, is Sarko Gregorian. He's a full-time police officer, also a psychotherapist going through our training program. He managed to convince his police chief, with some help from me, that the proper way to train therapists is to give them MDMA as part of their training for them to be a patient. And Sarko got permission to do that. That was filmed for the documentary, and there'll be a couple minutes in Netflix of a police officer getting MDMA to help other police officers with alcoholism and suicidal ideation. So it's going to really change people's attitudes about that. So we really need to do thinking a lot more about public education and about really this idea of accelerating the training of therapists. So just to say, there's, I think it's maybe important to mention that we're still being continually attacked in different media outlets and here and there for the fact that we had one back 6 years ago, well, 5 years ago is when this, a therapist had a unethical sexual contact with a patient. And, we found out about it 3.5 years ago. We took lots of action. We made it public. But then there's been a new feature by New York Magazine. And so there's a lot of new people who are hearing about it for the first time. And they're saying, how could you have done this? You've suppressed it, blah, blah, blah. When we didn't, we made it public and we did everything we could. And as far as we know, of all the 360 or so patients that we've had, this has only happened that one time, and it hasn't happened since we notified all of our therapists. So there is this negativity, I would say, that some of it feels just like, well, one of them was the Canadian Drug Policy Coalition. And they put out a statement without any fact checking. They called the FDA the Federal Drug Agency when it's the Food and Drug Administration. They said that I was the former executive director of MAPS. So I think we could interpret that as a little bit of Freudian wish fulfillment. But they had made all sorts of other things. So those of us in drug policy reform, Donald McPherson has done a lot of good work over the past 30 years in Canada in drug policy reform. So anyway, we're going to be speaking, sending them information, and hopefully there'll be a retraction of some of the factually inaccurate things. But we are doing our very best to not throw out the baby with bathwater, meaning that we do need to do whatever we can to make sure that there's no further episodes of unethical sexual behavior. We want to create safe spaces. So it's kind of a weird media environment where we are doing greater than we've ever done before, and we're getting more criticism that seems more and more unmoored from actual what happened. And so it's very difficult. Plus, there's certain statements that have been made that we're trying to figure out how do we respond to with respect to patient privacy, even though the patient made stuff public and biased and incomplete without context. So our hands are tied in certain ways as well. So in any case, it's been a challenge. I'm so used to, first off, all the negative media from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and then only starting into the middle to late 90s, positive media. The first really groundbreaking one was 2003, and it was Peter Jennings' documentary Ecstasy Rising. And that really changed the tone. So we've had more or less 20 years of really positive media. Now we've got a fair amount, mostly positive, but some of this negativity. So we're trying to figure out what can we learn from it without being defensive. How do we go forward and do our best? But overall, I think it's super exciting. The interim analysis, Jeff George and Dan Grossman adding to the board. We are thrilled to have Mike Millett helping us. And so I think the future is bright. We are very much moving into Europe. We've got 9 sites in 7 countries that we're training therapists there. We're close in Brazil and in Australia, elsewhere. And we're starting to think about, what's our pipeline. We're looking at Ibogaine. We're thinking about, trying to start our marijuana PTSD study. But the main thing is going to be biting our nails until October, when we get the final data point in our second phase 3 study.
Oh, thank you so much, Rick. It was, as always, hugely informative and so great to have so much good news. And thank you for addressing the negative news too. I think that's really important. We're all concerned about that. So it's really good to hear you bring it up head on. One of the theories I've heard about the negative news is this isn't uncommon, and I'm sure you have too, but it isn't uncommon for when drugs are getting close to being approved, that the negative results that are always there in drug development come to the light in a much bigger way than they did when they were in the phase 2 or earlier on. But people who want to be negative come out of the woodwork as drugs get closer to being approved.
Yeah, I guess that's true for sure. But my theory is a little bit different. It's that as we get more and more prominent and as we get more and more media, that people who want to attack us can then do that in a way that generates more attention for themselves.
Right.
So that they have incentives to be as inflammatory as possible. Mm-hmm. And I think that basically, both in the theory that you described and in my theory, they're both factors. But what it means is that this is going to be a continual process until the drug's approved and right. afterwards. And so that's why I think we really need to be starting to think about public education efforts. And we are starting to get more and more people just in that theme. I didn't mention it, but we're really planning now in a serious way for our big psychedelic science conference, which will be the 17th to the 25th of June in 2023 in Denver. And to illustrate just how the internal struggles as well, and I know we're running out of time, but I'll say the internal struggles as well as the external struggles, as we get more people from pharma. Now we've got about 180 people that we're, and about 35 of them are at the nonprofit and 145 are at the benefit corp. And lots of them have just been working us for a couple months. And we're also going to be hiring 40 more people or so as we move towards commercialization. And some we're going to hold off till we get the final data point in October, but we are hiring a bunch between now and then. So I had a very weird experience that, so once a month we have everybody together. We call it the mission control, and it's both MAPS and the benefit corp. And so I was describing this conference that we're going to have in June of 2023. And I was saying how I'd like to have some ayahuasca ceremonies around it, so that it's not just a conference where you go to hear stuff and network, but that we can actually have some ceremonies there. Now, I did not mention that 2 ayahuasca churches, one has gone through the US Supreme Court and it's legal, the UDB, Santo Daime up to the Ninth Circuit, they're legal. I didn't mention it, I didn't think it was necessary, but it turned out that one of the new pharma people filed an HR complaint against me, saying that I was endorsing illegal behavior and putting everything at risk. So it's kind of weird, but that we've got fears even inside our own organization. So we've really got to continue to do this sort of public education. And it's also the case that MAPS, the nonprofit, is going to continue to work to legalize MDMA, regardless of whether it's good or bad for the business model. That's how we evaluate public benefit, that we are trying to make it available to the public. So the good news is, of course, that the nonprofit owns the public benefit corp, so they can't say anything about don't do this, don't do that as far as legalization. They have tried. Some people have said that MAPS and me are talking about drug policy reform is an existential threat to the benefit corp, in that it's illegal off-label promotion, and that we'll be fined by the FDA. So our lawyers do not think that that's the case. But again, there's going to be more and more compliance and other issues as we move towards having a marketable prescription drug. So our communications are going to have to be more careful, but we're not going to have to stop working towards legalization. So it's really exciting times, and I think we're really settling in for the long run now that we've had this positive interim analysis.
Yep. No, congratulations. Wow, a different vibe than it was 2 months ago, Rick.
Yes.
Or 3 months, whenever it was, but fabulous. Really great news on so many counts. And anything we can do at the BPRG to support you, we're happy to be here. We're certainly cheering loudly for you. It's really wonderful. Thank you.
That's great.
So that's the end of our formal time. We do have the link for a few more minutes if people want to stay on and just go to the gallery view and say hello to people or ask questions or comments. Certainly, we're open to that. But it's also a beautiful day if you want to get out and enjoy it. Thank you, Rick, as always.
Yeah, close out the meeting.
Well, people can stay on if they want.
Did anybody, I just didn't understand one thing that Rick said. The second phase of the phase 3 were they told they don't have to run any subjects, or they've already run a certain number and that's sufficient? Did anybody get that?
Yeah, here, let me explain.
Oh, you're here, Rick. Oh, great.
Yeah. So what it means is that the interim analysis was when we had the primary outcome data from 60 people, and the other 100 or the other 40, all 100 or the other 40 had been enrolled, but they're in various stages of going through the treatment. So we have to continue the treatment for those 40 and a few more that we're going to have. So we'll end up with 102 or 103 and something like that. But the sites are not enrolling new people. That's the difference. But they're still continuing the treatment of the people that have recently been enrolled.
I see. Great. Thank you for that clarification.
Great. All right. Any other comments or questions? We're awfully lucky to have Rick with us.
Yeah.
I have one question, and I'm not really familiar with the FDA approval process, but as we move through this phase, what is the outlook for minors, people in their teenage years, adolescents?
Well, it's I'm so glad you asked that question. So that the FDA is requiring us to do studies with adolescents with PTSD. They're forbidding us to do it until they approve for adults, which is 18 years or older. Once they do approve that, if they do approve that, then we must do studies in adolescents, 12 to 17-year-olds. If that works, we have to go down to 7 to 11-year-olds. And so the idea here is that for me, the drug war is based on this idea of, oh, we got to protect our kids from drugs, and their brains are still developing, and they don't fully develop until they're 25, and therefore nobody should smoke pot till they're 25 or whatever. Of course, they still give loads of kids methamphetamine for ADHD when they're 6 or 7 or 8. But the other part is that from an economic point of view, the more that you help kids, there's more value to doing that, because then they have the whole rest of their lives ahead of them. And then if you look at medical marijuana and the transition from more public acceptance of medical marijuana and leading to legalization, the big transition was with the Epidiolex, with the CBD for childhood epilepsy. That's what got Sanjay Gupta on CNN to start doing these the series of documentaries. So I think if we can really help kids who are suffering, that's the most powerful message that we could be sending to the culture at large. On par or even better than veterans. Is kids that are suffering, that stuff happened to them, and they're in delicate straits. And we all know that there's now been, a rise in adolescent mental health problems because of the pandemic, because of the isolation. So what I've been talking about with the Benefit Corp is this idea of the political as well as the financial, in a sense. So we can do this study in adolescents at any time within the first 4 years or so. We have to do it during this period of data exclusivity of 5 years because it gives us another 6 months. But I think we should do it as soon as possible. So we have been talking just early stages about who might do those studies. So if there are people here in Boston who are sort of interested in doing these adolescent studies, we'd be, I don't know quite yet, but soon we'll be looking for trying to figure out where would we do these studies.
Fabulous. Thank you.
It's great.
Wonderful update. Thank you.
Jim Roosevelt has his hand raised. Hi, Jim.
Yes, thanks, Ann. I usually just listen and learn on these sessions, but what Rick mentioned about the need for payment and insurance coverage for accompanying therapy particularly resonates with the importance of continuing to try to develop particularly a third-party payment coverage for employers like Dr. Bronner's is doing.
Yes.
And that's proved to be challenging in some ways, but it's worth the continued effort. That's what I wanted to mention.
Yeah, and Jim, I should add that we have done some cost effectiveness studies and that they were very strong in the sense that it does look like we can make a good case to insurance companies to cover it. We will have to add the data from the first phase 3 study and then the second phase 3 study to update those cost effectiveness studies. But at this point, we're fairly hopeful that we'll be able to get insurance coverage.
And Rick, the two parts of that are the fully insured patients versus the employer-based third-party payments, and then it all needs to be developed.
Yeah.
Thank you. Important. And Jonathan Burgess has his hand raised.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. And thanks, Rick. I mean, Jesus, you're an idol in the world. I have talked about the fact that MDMA will be given to pediatric patients next. I'm thinking about it now in an interesting context where I just taught a class on substance-induced psychosis, and was thinking about the pruning process that happens and how THC in particular has the highest risk of converting a THC-induced psychosis to permanent psychosis. But that's only in people below the age of 18. So if you have a THC-induced psychosis as an older individual, your risk of converting into permanent psychosis goes way down. So I am curious. On the one hand, I see this incredible opportunity of fixing trauma early and then giving people a lifelong opportunity to be trauma-free and amazing individuals. I'm also curious how all of this dendritic arborization, which to me is the most exciting part of psychedelics, how that would impact teenage brains and young people's brains. And when I teach about psychedelics in some of my talks, I say, when you're born, you're a bag of cells with a skeleton, and you got to come up to speed with 3 billion years of evolution and 10,000 years of civilization. And it's this pruning process that brings you up to speed. Yeah. And then you get a little rigid in your thinking, and psychedelics come and lend you a hand, and all of a sudden you get to see new possibilities again, return to a little bit of the teenage state of possibilities. But every time I talk about that, I do kind of wonder about how psychedelics, and in this case MDMA, would affect that, the pruning process that is natural up until the age of around 26 years old.
Yeah, well, that's a terrific question. But what I will say first off is that I think as you're growing, particularly in adolescence, if you can layer in these pro-social neuronal connections, you know, if you can open up to emotions, you can open up to love and connection, that you're actually sort of building a stronger foundation at an earlier time. So
Yeah.
I think it's not just, oh, you know, they're going to do somehow or other damage. You're actually increasing. So I just from a personal thing, I was super shy in high school. And I think if I had been given MDMA at my bar mitzvah and had been able to, you know, feel emotions and talk about it, I would have had the ability to talk to girls in high school, which was too intimidating for me at the time. So I think that the other part of this is that, first off, traumatized adolescents don't have normal brains.
Right.
But they're already, you know, the hyperactive amygdala, shutdown of the prefrontal cortex. They're not good at putting the long-term storage. Their attachments are difficult. And so, but then the other part of this is that I would say, when I tell people about MDMA who've never done it, I say it's more gentle than cannabis. You know, it's easier because it doesn't do the ego dissolving, and it's not the same way as LSD or psilocybin either. So I think that to the extent that there is a link to psychosis with these kind of substances, I would say that MDMA has the lowest risk of that. And not only that, but there are people that have talked about, Julie Holland and others, about how MDMA could be good for schizophrenia. In the sense that it's integrative. Now, it's never been studied. It can only be studied on an inpatient basis. But I do think that MDMA as a substance is integrative rather than disintegrative. And it helps people feel things that have been overwhelming before, you know, so that people, so for the dissociation or the dissociate, so it helps counter dissociation, helps people integrate. So I think it's unlikely that MDMA is going to be producing psychosis. But the other big point is to look at the cultures that have successfully integrated psychedelics, meaning the Native American church, and there are 500,000 members or so who use peyote as part of their ceremonies, or the ayahuasca churches. And they do not have age limits. So these are people over millennia that have sort of incorporated into their culture psychedelics, classic psychedelics, like you know, ayahuasca and psilocybin mushrooms. And they do not have, and peyote, and they do not have these age limits. And so there's a lot of times, I think, where kids can benefit from these experiences. And so to the extent that we want to look at indigenous knowledge, it's not like they say you can only start this work later. I will say, from the Jewish mystical tradition, though, there has been this idea that you shouldn't really start until you're 40. That you should have had a family, you should have had your kids, and you don't really studying the Kabbalah and the Gemara and the, you know, sort of mystical aspects of the tradition until you're well grounded, till you're 40. So there is that, but it's not like linked to 26 and your brain developing. But I think it's an empirical question what you're asking, and I think that the risks are not so great that we cannot do the studies. So we will see what happens, and we will be looking for that kind of stuff when we do the first adolescent study.
Yeah, thanks. I'll let someone, I have follow-up questions, but I want to give permission.
Well, maybe if you wouldn't, I'm okay if you can just ask the follow-up questions, really.
We also,
What I just said.
Yeah. Right, we're at 4. Obviously, if people want to go, that's fine. If Rick is willing to stay, we also, maybe, could we let Kendley ask her question?
Sure.
Then?
Yeah.
Thank you. Nice to see you. Oh, you're muted, Kendley. Can you unmute yourself? Can you unmute? No. Well, it's nice to see you.
Maybe you can type your question in the chat.
Good idea. So maybe Jonathan, you can ask your follow-up while Kendley puts it in the chat.
Yeah. So yeah, follow-up question. Interesting is, you know, any thoughts on using MDMA in prison populations, not just for the trauma, but actually, can we decrease recidivism? Can we actually convert an antisocial brain to a pro-social brain? And inpatient psychiatry and ED, I bump into true antisocial individuals quite frequently, and it's like, I'm not sure what I can do for you, and it's really tough.
Yeah. Well, prisons have become the warehouse of mental illness patients.
Yeah.
They're in often now the first line of mental illness treatments is throw them into prison. It's really not a good environment for working on mental illness. So we're very interested in doing what you just said. So if I don't know if you've seen my follow-up to the Concord Prison Experiment. So if you go to my bio on the MAPS website, I did a 35-year follow-up to Leary's Concord Prison Experiment, where they gave psilocybin to people in prison and wanted to see if they could reduce recidivism. And basically what happened was that it didn't work, but they realized that the psychedelic experience is not enough. You need aftercare, you need support groups, and that's around the time they got kicked out of Harvard. So I think that Charlene Justice, who's my manager, my assistant, but really my manager, she's getting a master's degree right now, specifically in designing programs where we can do research with prisoners, but most likely with people recently paroled, to see if we can then reduce recidivism. And that's going to be one of the most important things. I think we also need to focus on prison guards as well, and also police officers. Everybody in the whole system is traumatized. Mm-hmm. And so it's something that it's more difficult to work in that group. We do want to work in that group. And after we have, finished our phase 3 study, I mentioned the last data point is in October, but then the people that were in the placebo group get to go through it again for MDMA. So we're still going to be treating a bunch of people. So it is one of the studies that we would like to do relatively quickly after we have approval. We will need to do the adolescent study. The other one I'll just very quickly mention is that we require people to taper off of SSRIs and other psychiatric medicines to get in our studies because those mute the effect of MDMA. However, in underground settings, we've heard multiple reports about people who've given double doses of MDMA to people on SSRIs, and they would have relatively full MDMA experience. That's been, what should I say? That is, hardly anybody's tried that because of the fear of serotonin syndrome. So one of the things that we need to do is a dose response safety study of people on SSRIs, giving them increasing amounts of MDMA, seeing if they have a full or so MDMA experience, and is there any signs of serotonin syndrome. I personally, at least from the anecdotal reports that we've heard, I don't think that the serotonin syndrome is likely. So that may be able to open up a whole new group of people. And Rachel Yehuda at the Bronx VA is thinking about doing this study because there's a lot of vets on SSRIs, and while they still have severe PTSD, they're reluctant to go off the SSRIs for fear of what emotions will emerge. But I think your idea of working with prisoners is very important. And not only that, but there's something else, which is that this idea of social impact bonds. So they began here in Boston, in Massachusetts, where the government doesn't provide certain services. Private actors can provide certain services, and if they end up saving the government money, they make an agreement with the government that they get paid back based on outcomes. And so that's the way it was set up for some of the early works to programs to do literacy and various other things to people. Pilot studies and show that it looks good, we could probably get large amounts of money from social impact bonds.
Yeah. I'm afraid we might be losing our time and means Rick is
dissolving.
No, Rick, you're frozen. Uh-oh. I think the universe is telling us we're done. Kendall, I put information in the chat about Rwanda, so reach out to me and I can help you with that question. I don't know if other people can hear or not.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Yep, I can hear.
So something happened. Oh, Rick, you froze. Are you back?
Yep, I'm back.
Okay.
I don't know what happened.
Well, I think it's the universe telling us to stop. But I was saying, when we lost you for a minute, Kendall's question was about Rwanda, so I asked her to be in touch with me so I can help her with that. I'd like to take anything off your plate that I can.
Yeah. Do you have the contact information for the therapist in Rwanda that we were working with?
Yeah, the PIH people. Yeah.
Not the PIH. There was somebody else that was at that psychiatric hospital.
Oh, no, then maybe I don't. No.
Okay, I'll see if I can find it and get it to you.
Okay, that'd be great. Good. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone who participated, listened, cheered on, and taught us so much this
Oh.
afternoon.
Cindy Cassidy, that's her name.
I don't know her.
Oh,
Is she
okay.
through PIH?
No. I think she was our contact in Rwanda. That I'll send you her information.
That'd be great. I'll get it to Kendall then. Good. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the day. It's a beautiful day. It's time to get out and enjoy it.
Thank you, thank you, thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Everyone, thank you.
Okay. Sherry, you extended us.
I did.
Okay. Well, I think we can end. Thanks to everyone. Hard to leave, but time to go. Bye-bye.